Welcome to the Friday Roundtable. Rudyard Griffiths here, the publisher of The Hub. I'm joined by co-founder, editor-at-large, Sean Speer for today's edition, the 28th of February. Sean, how do we find you today?
I'm surviving, Rudyard. As you know, we're without childcare for part of this week, which always makes things pretty interesting between a pretty crazy political and policy environment and wrangling a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. It's been a long week. I felt a bit like Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office at various points over the past few days.
Someone was calling you a dictator. I bet. No doubt. No ice cream. You're a dictator. I want more ice cream. Let's, Sean, thank some fantastic Hub fellows. Wow, we are so fortunate these last couple of weeks. A ton of people coming onto the platform and joining as a lifetime Hub fellow. We're going to give you the honors of reading out the honor roll.
Yeah, I complain that Rudyard always gets the great job of acknowledging our tremendous supporters across the country. This week, I have the honor to do so. It was a big week for us. We have Neil R., Susan M., Jeff M., Ian G., Morris P., James R., and Colette P., all coming on board as lifetime fellows to the Hub to support our independent news and commentary. Representation from across the country. And so on behalf of Rudyard and me, let me just say how grateful we are to this group and those who've come before them and made a real investment in us and the work that we do. We couldn't be more grateful.
Yeah, hear, hear. Well, what a wild week it was. And I think we're recording this show later on Friday. So we've got to start with the Zelensky-Trump press conference, because I think it sets up, Sean, a discussion we need to have about the very real chance that tariffs will be coming down on Tuesday, and just how Canadian policymakers, decision makers are reacting in light of the Zelensky-Trump blow-up in the Oval Office. So let's play a short clip. People are going to get audio if they're listening on the podcast. If you're watching this as a private YouTube feed, you're going to see the video right now.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this, I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on out here. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
I can tell you
you're
again,
running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire
with guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement. It's going to be a very hard thing.
Wow, Sean. That went on for over an hour this afternoon, Friday, the 28th of February. What do you make of it? We've really never seen these types of conversations. We always know that they go on behind the scenes. You worked in a prime minister's office. You knew that tough conversations with ministers and even other foreign leaders is part of the job description. Sure. But this was all out there in the open in the kind of rawest way that I've ever seen it before.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, what I'd say, Roger, is one thing we've tried to do at the Hub over the past several weeks is, to a certain extent, try to empathize with the Trump administration, not justify or sympathize, but empathize, to try to put ourselves in its shoes and its way of thinking about America's place in the world and what that means for all of us, including in Canada. And I have to tell you, the animus that the president and the vice president direct towards Ukraine and Zelensky is difficult to empathize with. I just cannot. I can understand wanting to revisit American policy vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukrainian war. I could empathize with wanting to try to create the conditions for some sort of peace settlement. But I just cannot get my head around, Roger, this instinct on the part of the president, to a certain extent, Vance and others around them, to treat Ukraine as essentially the aggressor here and the source of the problem, and not to recognize, of course, that it is in a war for its survival against Russia. So that's, I suppose, a long way of saying I'm as mystified as anybody else, not just of this particular episode, but of the way that Trump and Vance have thought about American policy vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine, really from the get-go.
Yeah, it's again a fascinating 1 hour video because there's multiple cameras in the Oval Office, and there's one cutaway of Marco Rubio sitting on the sofa, with his arms crossed, a bit like me right now, looking incredibly glum and silent, and I wonder, Sean, about all those other Republicans out there. And not just the ones, let's say, who I disagreed with. I thought that this was not a war that Ukraine could win, and that at times we were provoking and pushing the Russians in ways that I think were very dangerous. Long-range missile attacks into Russia, the Kursk incursion by Russian forces, the first time Russia was invaded by foreign troops since the Germans did that in the Second World War. So I had things like you maybe that I disagreed with, but I would count myself amongst those broader group of conservatives who like the liberal international order and feel that, one of the lessons of the Second World War, hard won with tens of millions of deaths, is that we should not allow countries to invade other territories through conquest, abrogating their sovereignty. And yes, this is what's happened. Vladimir Putin will end up with a portion of Ukraine after this.
Yes.
But how the peace is conducted, how it is communicated and formulated, peace with honor is to me the litmus test, the minimum. And what we saw in that Oval Office was this kind of dressing down of Zelensky. I will say it. I think it was dishonorable. It showed a lack of just basic decency towards the reality that Zelensky and his country faces, which is they were invaded. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of their fellow countrymen and women have died, and they are going to lose thousands of square kilometers of their territory. I mean, this is a remarkable situation. I don't understand the flip, the reversal, I don't know if you have any clues. Is it as people have, even Zelensky has hypothesized, that the president is in some kind of disinformation bubble and he's consuming information or sources that are not, reliable, accurate, grounded in reality? It's just hard to know how we got to this conversation today.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to say something, Roger, that will offend the international relations scholars who may listen to our podcast. One thing a conclusion I've reached over the past couple of years, both with respect to how we've seen things play out between Russia and Ukraine, and of course, Israel-Hamas, is sometimes we risk overcomplicating foreign policy issues. It's not to say that we shouldn't be clear-headed and clear-eyed about how to execute foreign policy. As you said, I think we've both had misgivings about the escalation of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the extent to which Canada and others have played a role in that escalation. But in assessing the basic circumstances, sometimes I think, relying on the insights of my grandfather in Thunder Bay produces a clearer understanding of what's going on than depending on, a bunch of international scholars and whoever else. This is kind of a shirts and skins thing, right, Rudyard? The Russians are bad. The Ukrainians are relatively good. how that then influences foreign policy, of course, ought to be up for debate. But the same goes between Israel and Hamas. Israel is good, Hamas is bad. I think that is like a basic way to kind of understand these conflicts is a good starting point. And what strikes me is this week, Roger, we mark the 14th anniversary of William F. Buckley Jr.'s death. As someone who, of course, played this crucial role in the development and evolution of the American conservative movement. I mean, it's not an oversimplification to say we got Ronald Reagan, we ended the Cold War, and all of those major developments stem from the work that Buckley did at National Review. And of course, I don't know what Buckley would say about particular policy questions vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine war, how much the U.S. should be spending and what type of weapons it ought to be supplying and all the rest. But I think it's pretty fair to say that if you would have asked Buckley this question, he would have said, yeah, the Soviets are our enemies, and ergo, Ukraine is our ally. And the fact that basic formulation seems alien to Trump and some of the people around him, as I said at the outset, just makes it really hard to empathize and in turn kind of understand where the Americans are coming from. And I guess to go full circle, I think that is making it difficult for leaders in Canada and elsewhere to formulate their own policies, because so much of what we've seen from this White House over the past several weeks really defies what on the face of it you described as logic.
Yeah, so let's go to how, if you're a Canadian decision maker, if you're advising the Prime Minister and you see that video and what happened to Zelensky, which seems to all stem largely from a resistance around this mineral deal. So look, there are a lot of analogies here that worry me, Sean, because Trump was, let's remember this, asking Zelensky to enter into an agreement with the United States to hypothetically, I guess, if the minerals could be extracted and sold, to provide the United States with potentially hundreds of millions of dollars as a kind of share of Ukraine's natural resources. And that money seemingly was not attached or would be attached to a security guarantee. It was Trump's perception of what somehow was owed to the United States. And it was clear that the Zelensky government was resisting this. And one has to wonder if the kind of the Donnybrook that unfolded in the Oval Office this afternoon was because Zelensky and his team ultimately were unable to come to terms or unable to swallow what was just demonstrably a kind of punitive, again, seemingly irrational agreement. So you look at that and you think, wow, we're going to go into a tariff fight with this guy. And, in the classic game of chicken, it looks like he's throwing the steering wheel out of the car. I mean, that's what I took out of that discussion today. So what the heck do you do in light of this type of performance and scenario?
Yeah, I would say, Roger, that that as difficult it is to discern what's motivating the president and other members of the administration on the Ukraine question, I think it remains more straightforward to understand its impulse towards tariffs in general and towards Canada and Mexico in particular. I think what a lot of that's played out over the past several weeks and the uncertainty about if and when tariffs are coming is the sideshow. I think the real story here is something we've talked about a lot. The president is both philosophically and practically committed to the imposition of tariffs. We might be able to purchase ourselves some short-term reprieve by doing X, Y, or Z. But I think tariffs are coming, whether they come on Tuesday as they're currently scheduled or some other time. And either way, they're just going to continue to loom over our economy and over our bilateral relationship. And I think at some point we need to shift the conversation, as we've set out at various points over the past several weeks, to what can we do to fortify and strengthen our economy. We've seen some interesting progress coming out of Nova Scotia and elsewhere on interprovincial trade barriers. That's great, but I think we need to keep pushing further. What we're seeing even out of Mark Carney's campaign strikes me as disproportionate to the economic challenge facing the country. I think we need to see much greater ambition on taxation, both for businesses and capital. We need to see a much more ambitious deregulation agenda. And my fear, in a way, is Trump has essentially seized control not just of our bilateral agenda, but of our own domestic policy agenda, because so many of us seemingly have our eggs in the basket of when these tariffs are coming, how they're coming, et cetera, and not focusing, as you put it to me a couple of weeks ago, on controlling the stuff we can control. And I think that's got to be the message to policymakers, and not responding, in the minute to Trump's impulses and provocations.
Well, I think we've got the title for today's show, a serenity prayer for tariffs is what Canadian policymakers should adopt. My just final comment here is I think something happened in the Oval Office today that is not unimportant, which is that when this president is rebuffed, and I think that's what happened before that press conference.
Yes.
I think they were unable to come to an agreement on the mineral rights, and then it all exploded into the open once they went into the Oval to do the press conference. It suggests to me that look, I want to do it too. I want to sock them in the nose. I want those retaliatory tariffs. I want to just, get all the Kentucky bourbon I can and, pour it down the drain. But I think what you see here is that could be very contrary to actually achieving what we want to achieve, which is to ensure that the U.S. tariffs on their own become an own goal for this administration, and that we don't create the preconditions to, as you could see, the president with Zelensky, he digs into something and he's unable to get himself out of that cul-de-sac, right? He is unable to see the steps to de-escalate a path forward, some form of compromise. So I look at that, and again, this is not a popular message right now, and I get it because temperatures are high, and I'm as pissed off as anybody else about how Canada is being treated by the United States. But I look at that presser, and I look what happened to Zelensky, and I say to myself, we need to be really thinking hard about whether retaliatory tariffs are the smart play. I think it should be a longer game, Sean, where we just let their own tariffs do the damage to their economy, and we let the president own this thing from A to Z.
Yeah, great message and great insight. I agree, of course. And I would say, just in that vein, Rudyard, might be prepared to argue that the more important development of the Oval Office, as it relates to what you just set out, is actually with British Prime Minister Starmer a couple of days ago, when given an opportunity to in effect defend Canada, he punted, focused understandably on his own relationship with President Trump and his country's own interests. And I think, in a way, that experience was a direct challenge to those who think, oh, there's an easy way out of this. We just need to expand trade with, Commonwealth preferences or Europe or whatever. In a way, my takeaway from the meeting between Starmer and Trump was to remind us that, for better or for worse, our future resides here in North America. There's no way around the problems with Trump. The only way is through. And the only way to get that done, as you say, to be as clear-headed as possible. And my biggest fear is that the political incentives are tilted so strongly in favor of saber rattling. And I don't know if we'll get to Doug Ford's election victory over the course of the conversation, but in a way, I suspect that a lot of politicians are seeing Ford win his third majority in a row by subordinating his own agenda and his own record, and instead creating a faux fight with President Trump and the U.S. administration and winning a pretty sizable majority. I worry a lot that the disincentive, or the incentives rather, for that type of clear thinking that you set out are pretty low, and that puts us in a direction that may feel good in the moment, but is actually in conflict with Canada's long-term interests.
Yeah, well said. Well, look, let's take a break. We're going to say goodbye to our complimentary listeners joining us on our free podcast version of the Roundtable, and those of you watching the first half of this program on YouTube. We're making this free to you. If you want the back half of the show, either in lovely video like you're seeing right now, or to listen to at your pleasure on demand, become a Hub Hero. You can do that for $1 a week. It's the best deal in town. You get all of our premium podcasts at full length. You're going to get tons of video also at full length, and you get all of our best paid content on the hub.ca. So a quick goodbye to our complimentary listeners, and back in a moment with our Hub Heroes and Hub Fellows.